Holistic Dose, your go-to podcast for big ideas distilled into microdose insights without all the BS. I'm Tiffany.
And I'm Jeanette.
And today we're going to be talking about why women are unhappy in marriages today. And I know, Jeanette, you being a divorce attorney, family law attorney, you have so much experience in this area.
Yes. What we are seeing is that a lot more women are filing for divorce than men. And we are repeatedly hearing from women how desperately unhappy they are in marriage. So I did want to spend some time in today's episode to really dive into that and talk about, what is going on and what we can do about it. But, first I'd like to talk about just gender roles and, what is the traditional gender roles today. And, I think most of us consider the traditional gender roles as wife stays at home, takes care of the kids, husband goes to work and takes care of the family. What was your family like? Did you have a traditional family like that?
No, actually I didn't. I had both parents working. My dad was an immigrant and my mom is a second generation. So she worked nights as a nurse and my dad worked the days and they basically traded off on their parenting roles. And then my parents got divorced when I was, I think, around 7. And then it became, my mom had full custody of my sisters and I. So she was always working, like
So you
all the
say full
time.
custody, like, did you not see your dad at all? Did you go to your dad's?
Yeah, no, I would say for the first, few years, we would see him on weekends, if I can recall, every other weekend, but honestly, not a lot, and that definitely impacted me and my future decisions too, and then when we moved to a completely different state, we moved to South Florida, and, we saw my dad maybe, sometimes every summer, every other summer, and then we would go for holidays, but even when we were there, the time just wasn't quality at all, so,
Interesting.
yeah.
So before they divorced, when you said they would kinda take turns with the parenting, what about the
Mhm.
household stuff, like the cooking, the cleaning, the mental load that we hear women complain about often?
Yeah, I honestly I'm trying to remember, I think a lot of it was, my mom was more I d it's kind of hard for me to remember, to be honest. I think they did split a little bit of it, but it was probably still more of my mom definitely to be there for the emotional aspect and for that main, role,
Yeah.
honestly. Um, Most definitely. Yeah, how about you?
My family was very traditional. My mom mostly stayed at home. She had an education. She has a degree in nursing and is still a registered nurse. But my dad's role was primarily as the income earner, right? And then my
Mhm,
mom's
mhm,
primary role was taking care of me. And so sometimes she would work, but it was always like finding a job that would fit around, getting me off
mhm,
the bus or, doing all the school activities. And I also grew up in a very religious home, and
mm,
that very much was sort of taught to me as there's a woman's role and a man's role, and this is what a family should look like.
mhm.
I'm seeing a lot of problems with that now. And, in preparation for our talk today, I actually wanted to find out, like, where did our today's gender roles even come from? So
Yeah.
dug into a little bit of research, and it's interesting because, I mean, it goes back to, like, prehistoric times. And, we're told in school that even prehistoric humans, the hunter-gatherers, the women were, gathering the berries and taking care of the
Mhm.
children, and the men were out hunting. And it's really interesting because recent studies by anthropologists are showing that that's actually not true. It was an assumption that was made, and it's what we were taught, but what they are seeing in their studies, they are actually finding these skeletal remains of, I guess, like Neanderthals,
Wow.
and they're looking at the skeletons and comparing the skeletons of the men and the women, and all of them have the same trauma patterns, which
Mm.
means that they were all doing the same work. Because if you only had, men hunting and women gathering the berries, they're gonna have different trauma patterns. So these
Mhm.
studies are actually showing that it was a very egalitarian society, and they believe now that women likely hunted. And, one of the articles I read, there was a discussion about, yeah, there still were differences in physique that,
Mhm.
men were physically stronger and faster, but women had more endurance, and that's because of estrogen, and that the endurance is also important for hunting. And so, it's now believed that even men shared equally in child rearing, and it really was basically about survival. Like, everyone just pitch in, and there really weren't these very defined gender roles. So then, how did we get to where we are today? So it's believed that things started changing with this first agricultural revolution, which was in 10,000 BC. But that is when, instead of becoming hunters and gatherers, people started gardening and
Mhm.
growing all their food, and for the first time in history, there was a food surplus, and so
Wow.
having this extra food is what started creating different roles and even social classes, because for the first time, there was a commodity that was an excess commodity to control.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, and so that is actually when gender roles also started to be created. It's also when
Mhm.
slavery started, because you needed someone to work the fields, and it's thought that the reason that the gender role started being really defined in that time is, 1, there was huge population growth because of
Mhm.
the surplus of food, and so, if women weren't having as many children in, previous times, it was easier for everyone to, pitch in and have the same
Right.
roles. But if you're having, 4 or 5 children, I don't know what the average was, but the women ended up basically just needing to full-time care for children. And then also it is, theorized that there was then more of a focus on a grain-based diet, as opposed to, like,
Oh.
meat and then, whatever you gather and pick, and
Uh-huh.
so you need someone to process those grains. And so then the women became, "Okay, I'm watching the kids and I'm processing these grains while the men
Mhm.
are out working in the field." And so that
Right.
really started to define these gender differences. And then there were more changes in the Industrial Revolution, which in Britain was 1760 to 1840, but that's when we started getting modern machines that made some of the physical work easier.
Mhm.
So then
Mhm.
we do see women starting to actually enter the workforce there, but it's like, because of the historical differences that were in place, women were still given the lower paying jobs in the
Yeah.
factories, and then it just evolved from there, but we've never gotten to a place where there's equality again, like back in, prehistoric times, and, now women are in the workforce, and, our workforce today, physical strength is practically irrelevant, right?
Right.
There's
It's
very
definitely
few jobs.
not needed. Yeah.
Exactly, so it's all about our mind, and,
Mhm.
you know, it doesn't matter your gender to be an excellent lawyer or,
Yeah.
whatever, doctor, etcetera, but there's still this leftover inequality. And, I think we're even seeing that in modern marriages. Have you seen a lot of, like, the trad wife, kind of movement? And there's nothing wrong. I don't think that, you have to have the same exact roles, but it's just interesting that, people have a very strong belief that this is the way it should be, and
Right.
even the wrong belief that it's always been that way, and it
Mhm.
hasn't. It is not that, men and women are born to do something completely different, and history actually shows us that it hasn't always been like that. What is it like, so you're out there dating. What is it
Mhm.
like as far as what you're seeing as far as gender roles in dating?
Oh, yeah. So, and before I touch on that, I had a thought that came to my mind. So, like, so my dad is first generation. He's an immigrant from Romania. And I know that even with him, right? So he is very much like grew up in a communist system, and he has in this idea that like women, need to be in dresses and skirts and super feminine all the time. And I was not like the girly girl.
Mhm.
And even he has this idea in his mind today that because my daughter isn't girly girl, that Well, it's like, "Oh, it's because how your mom dresses." And I'm like, "Well, because I wanna wear jeans to work, just because I wear pants, but I still dress up. I still have femininity in me." And his mindset around money and finances is interesting. He's okay if he were to date somebody that makes more money from him than him. However, he cares about the perception of what other people see. He wants to be the one to hold the credit card to pay, even if it's coming from the woman's bank.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yes. So, my experience as far as dating goes, let's see. I think that, because I'm naturally like a super high achiever, I look for that in a partner. And I think, it's funny. I think what men and women think that they like or want in each other is so far different because you see these men on their dating profiles holding up like, the comical, like the fish and the posing with all the common things and showing their chest off and all these things. And what they don't really realize is that um, we don't need them to go and hunt for us to see that they have those skills, and we also do not care about whether they have a six-pack, a 12-pack,
Mhm.
whatever. We care that they can provide those 6 and 12 packs for us to drink more than anything, and it's the financial security that we wanna make sure of, but we wanna make sure, at least I do, that I can still provide and take care of myself. I think that's just also because how I was raised that, my mom being mostly a single mom, like, and as I am now, I always like to make sure that I can take care of myself and provide for myself no matter what. But
Yeah.
it's interesting where guys put so much effort into the lies about their age on the profile as well as, you know, the older pictures that they use. Some guys even use AI generated photos. Like if a woman did that, oh my god, like we would be shocked. But all of a sudden they do that, and for me, what's really important is finding somebody who's passionate in what they're doing and can provide, but I don't need them to be a provider for me necessarily. I want them to be of equal level to me or better,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, and I think that kind of brings us into, okay, are women and are men unhappy in marriage? And there's a recent study by a Stanford professor who found that 69% of divorce is initiated by women. And I
Mhm.
see that in my divorce practice. Like the vast majority of divorces are started by women. And it's women who are saying that they're not happy in marriage. And something interesting in the study was for unmarried partnerships that were hetero partnerships, as far as ending the relationship, by gender, it's 50-50. So boyfriends and girlfriends, the men equally break up, as often as the women. But marriages, almost 70% of the time, the breakup of the marriage is because the woman wants it.
Yeah.
And, there are several studies that show that married women are less satisfied than married men and that satisfaction is equal between genders for non-married partnerships. So it really is like once we get into marriage,
Mhm.
women become unhappy
Yep.
and men also benefit more from marriage and men get so pissed off, and, I'm on, like,
Oh,
TikTok
yes.
and Instagram, and I'm very vocal about the work that I do and, what people even need to do to save their marriage. I'll get nasty
Right.
comments about, "Oh, you just profit from divorce." Hey, like,
No.
I'm smart, and if divorce went away or, the divorce rate plummeted, I could pivot.
You
There's
can
a lot of other things I could do.
figure out something else. Yeah.
Yeah, but, the reality is that men are just clinging to an outdated system,
Mhm.
and, I believe that is because that outdated system really benefited them the most.
Well, I think that this is also too why you end up seeing so many affairs happening, right? And
Yeah,
and things like that. It's just like, somebody the people are just not happy in the setup, but it's almost like it's too difficult to go and make a change and uproot and everything, and they kinda have their cake and they eat it too.
mhm.
So, yeah, ch
Yeah,
change is hard, and once you bring it to the surface, there's like, "Okay, now I need to do something about it."
yeah, and just from my own observations I've helped thousands of people at this point get divorced. I believe that women are not as financially dependent now on men,
Mhm.
that, historically and even now, the main benefit that women get from marriage is being taken care of financially.
Right.
But Now we have more women in the workforce that have been in the
Mhm.
workforce for, any time probably, in modern history.
Right.
And so women don't have the expectation of all I want from marriage is to be cared for financially, and then
Correct.
my job is child rearing. We do want emotional intelligence. We
Yes.
want a supportive partner. We want a best friend. And
Someone just to do life with,
yes,
honestly.
and the
Mhm.
provider aspect, for me, and I know for a lot of people, like, it's important,
Yep.
but for me, it's more about wanting someone to be able to equally provide. Like, I
Mhm.
personally don't expect one person to be able to financially take care of an entire family. I'm not saying that's not possible, just for me
Mhm.
personally, because I do think that's really hard. Like, there's job loss, there's illness, like, I
Well,
just
it's just the pure stress and pressure alone that so
exactly.
many people go through, like, almost like, "Oh my god, I can't leave and try to go chase my dreams because I hold the boat up for the whole family."
Exactly. So for me personally, it being a true partnership where we're both
Mhm.
equally responsible or close to equally. I get that not everybody makes the same amount of money.
Yep.
My situation happens to be where we're pretty similar in income. But when I was dating, I would date guys who made, not even six figures, right?
Mhm,
And that's
mhm.
fine. Like it's like okay if they're contributing, and especially like if they can provide health insurance, that would be an attractive thing since,
Yeah.
with self-employment, whatever. But, for me, that's what's been really important. And I think for women, they're wanting more than just a financial contribution.
Right.
And then it's like, okay, why is it so hard for men to provide that? And I think that it's these social standards and even the
It is.
messages that we are giving to little boys when they're young, and just what we're teaching them. We don't teach boys to be in touch with their emotions. A lot of time it's like
Yeah, it's just not accepted.
exactly, like a little boy crying and it's like, "Toughen up," and,
Mhm,
you're not
mhm.
supposed to have those feelings, but, teaching kids like that is making it so they cannot emotionally connect as
Yep.
men,
Mhm.
and women are not going to settle for less than having that emotional connection, and so that's the real just bottom line problem is,
Right.
um, you know, if women are going to marry, we have to have that, and we're not going to stay in a marriage if we don't.
Yeah, I mean, that's kinda where I say just in regards to, like, my dating, if the person is not emotionally aware and in touch with themselves, right? I saw this, one of Mel Robbins' podcast recently, and she explained the concept, and she's like, "You'll never think about people the same after hearing this or learning this, is that we are all adults, we are all a version of an eight-year-old self that has basically never healed trauma. So if somebody gives you, which I've experienced this lately with people, if someone gives you the silent treatment, which is also can be, told as being ghosted, it
Mhm.
is a little 8-year-old child who was never like you never learned how to handle those emotions and process it, whether you're like, "Oh, I don't wanna speak to them because I might speak out of place or I might be angry or
Mhm.
this or that." You were never taught, and we just weren't taught as adults. So then we go through these motions and the behaviors, and then it spills into our relationships, and it's like, well, how can you be married to somebody and not feel comfortable talking to them about finances, sex, raising the kids if you know that they're gonna be walking on eggshells or they're gonna lash out at you, and yeah, if I'm gonna enter a relationship and I start seeing that early on and somebody can't handle emotionally just texting me back to say, like, whatever it is, like, "No, I don't wanna go over this," or if they're coming into the relationship with past trauma from their marriages that were again, was unresolved things from their child, then sorry, if you don't bring what the level that I have currently or better,
Mhm.
I just rather stay single. I have a great, like, happy life, you know?
Yeah. So, something that I'm seeing is women really want a man who can just assess in the household what needs to be done and
Mhm.
then step up and do it. And a lot of times men will say in response, "Well, if you just give me a list, I'll make sure it's all done."
Mhm.
But then women are like, "No, I don't want to have to take," and we talk about the mental load. Women don't want
Mhm.
the mental load of having to come up with the list
Yep.
and then give it to the man to do. And something I hear over and over is women saying, "I feel like my husband is another child
Child.
because
Mhm.
I have to make my child lists. I have to give my child directions and tell them exactly what needs to be done," and we don't want that in a husband.
No.
And one of my favorite, people to follow on Instagram is mom chats. I think there's mom chats and dad chats. There's a husband
Oh,
and
I
wife.
haven't heard of that one.
I actually sent it to you. I just don't think you realize the name of it. It was the woman in this TikTok saying that she mentioned to her husband the other day that
Oh,
she's
yeah.
having a hard time feeding herself. And she's
Yes.
like, I have ADHD, I get
Mhm.
overwhelmed,
That's me.
and I'm worrying about what I'm feeding the kids and everybody else, and I'm having a hard time eating." And she said, "You know what? My husband's response was, it wasn't, 'Well, that's stupid,' or 'Let me give you advice on how to fix it.'"
Right.
She said the next day she opened the fridge and he had meal prepped for her.
That's
And
amazing.
yes, and he had made her favorite muffins and even cut them up like she likes them cut up. And there was cut up fruit. And basically, he saw her need,
Mhm.
didn't judge it,
No.
saw the need, and then he took care of it.
Yeah.
And
It's honestly, it's no different than if you are in the workplace and you're
yeah,
anticipating needs of a project or where you can release load from your colleagues, we're all in the support system, right? So it's no different. So I don't know why
yeah,
not just
you're
doing it
right.
inherently at
Because
home.
men are so good in the workplace, and it is, like, the same thing. If you're a part of a team, you don't
Mhm.
if you're at work and you're someone who always needs very specific instructions and a list, you're not going to achieve as much. You are valued when you can see the problem, when you can figure out what needs done, and you get it done, and the same thing at home.
Well, those traditional workplace rules kind of also take place. One of my former colleagues and I, we used to always, I saw some Instagram posts on this, something like this. Like, if you think about a traditional office workplace, like someone's getting married, having a baby, having a birthday, who's planning all those things?
Yeah, it's the women.
If there's a group meeting and they need a note taker, who's taking the notes?
Or if they need lunch ordered.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, and it's not even them defaulting because not every office space has, a
Mhm.
receptionist or somebody whose role that is. It's just to default. It's almost like, "Oh, wow, I never even thought to do that. Well, we'll just lean on so and so to
Yeah.
handle it."
Well, that makes me
No.
think of offices I've been at that are actually mostly women, but there would
Mhm.
still be the person that we called the office mom, right? Like, have you
Right.
had that? "Oh, this is the office mom. She's the one who, makes sure everything's taken care of," and I never
But
really
even
thought
still,
about
that
it
gets
until now,
exhausting.
but that's kinda bullshit.
Yeah.
We shouldn't need an office mom. Everybody should be just looking for what needs to be done and getting it done.
Mhm.
That's very interesting.
Exactly.
And
Uh-huh.
what have you seen much weaponized incompetence in your relationships?
Well, give me an explanation, like, what do you mean?
So, my mom actually, when I was growing up, would call it strategic incompetence, but
Okay.
now it's actually like
Like playing dumb, like, "I don't
yes,
know how to do that?"
purposely doing something wrong, so you're not actually expected to do it right, and it's something that a lot of women repeatedly say, "This is a problem in my relationship." Like, I'm trying to think of an example, just
Yeah, give me an example because I was always the one that because like, I definitely have more masculine energy because I was raised by a single mom, and then I had to figure a lot of things out for myself, so, like, I was the one who like, my mom taught me how to use a power drill, how to paint walls, how to spackle
yeah.
walls. I can fix so many things and put things together, so I oftentimes sometimes can be the woman that's teaching the man some
Yeah.
things too, which
Yeah,
I
I mean, it's usually with, like, domestic things or
Mhm.
things that are more traditional for a woman, like, "Hey, cook dinner," or something, and they'll basically purposely do a half-assed job so
Mhm.
that it makes it easier for
So,
the
like, they'll
woman.
never ask me to do that
Yes,
again.
for the woman to be
Mm.
like, "You know what? It's easier for me to do it." And this is
No, I've not personally experienced it, but also maybe that's because I haven't really gotten as far in my rel or seen relationships that were worthwhile to, like, entertain for a longer period of
what
time,
about when
so
you were married?
no, actually, because he was raised more by his mom and, his aunts, like, he knew and did a lot of the traditional
Interesting.
household things, but I had to teach him more of the other roles. Like
Interesting.
yeah, it was a very different dynamic, like, really
Yeah.
different. Mhm.
Yeah, and then the mental load as well as far as, who's planning the calendars, and this one, like, I get onto my husband Jeff about, like, even so we're at the beach now or, of course,
Mhm.
all on vacation, and, like, his daughter booked some volunteer stuff during our vacation, and that's why they're leaving today, like, and
Oh.
she texts the family group chat, and she's like, "Hey, I'm volunteering at the Dogwood Festival on this date," and
Like, "What?"
like, this is my stepdaughter, like, I just feel like, my husband should have been the one to say, "Hey, that's during family vacation, you're gonna have to cancel it."
Mhm.
And that did not like, he was just completely silent. And so I just
Mm.
respond and say, "Do you know that's during spring break?" And then Eva says, "Yeah." Like, "Okay, I guess
So you
we'll."
had to be, like, the
I
bad
ha
one
yeah, I
if you were to put a stop to it.
exactly.
Mhm.
Like, "Okay, I guess we'll end our vacation on Thursday," but, like, I don't feel like that's what should have happened. I feel
No.
like dad and, if it would be
And you
different
didn't feel like you had the right place and space
because 'cause I'm
because you being the
stepmom.
stepmom. Mhm.
Exactly. I just
Mhm.
feel like dad should have taken this part of the mental load. He knows when spring
Jeff.
break is. I know, right? I've told him a million times the dates of spring break, like,
Yeah.
like, keep track of
But
that, and
they're the mom of the house, and you're the
mhm.
calendar keeper, so you have to have everybody in line.
Yeah, then there's a whole other dynamic when you are talking about being a blended family, like,
Mhm.
I am not going like, I've just refused to do it, like, with stepkids. First of all, I mean, balancing my career and 3 kids, like, I don't want to do that, like, I don't want to be the
Mhm.
one to take all that on. So, he will take care of, like, when it comes to volleyball or the things that his girls are very
Mhm.
involved in because they've chosen it, those he completely takes care of. But it's more like things that, like, are important to me, like, "Hey, I wanna go on a family vacation."
Mhm.
It's like, "Okay, I need you to, like, take on some of the mental load to make this happen because this is important to me, and I
Right.
think it's important to us as a family," whatever. So, yeah, I mean, that's very frustrating, and that's, like, conversations he and I have to have, and,
Mhm.
but, looking.
Well, I think that's those conversations are super important to have, open communication, I'm all for that, especially, like, if I'm considering dating somebody, I know what I experienced in my past marriage and relationships that I think it's important to lay those things out and know it's important so that you do not build that resentment. You
Yeah,
have it really clearly defined up front.
yeah,
And I think that's same with, I know that you had asked, more things about dating, like, as far as gender roles and as far as being on dates and who pays and things like that. Um, I used to approach it a little bit differently. I think, like, I sometimes felt like, well, if I felt like the date was like, I'm like, definitely not feeling it. I would like go reach for my card to like offer to pay. And then if they accepted it, I was like, definitely a no there. um, but now I've tried to just step a little bit more into a feminine role, but again, I guess, I don't know, is it a double standard there?
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I definitely know that I wouldn't like it if a guy let me pay for, like, the entire bill on a first
Correct.
date. Maybe
Correct.
that is a double
Yes.
standard.
Yeah.
Like, I guess I was used to a man picking up the check, but if I offered, I'm not gonna judge if, like, we split the bill, right?
Right. Right.
But yeah, I would find it very odd if I'd say, "Oh, let
Mhm.
me get it," but honestly, I
Yeah,
don't think
because
I ever really
I still
offered.
think that there is a masculine, feminine role
Yeah.
there, and like I was telling you that I had saw in some recent podcast clip that, like, the men who are completely the stay-at-home parent, that when they're not in that role of providing, that they do experience lower testosterone, which I felt was, like, really interesting.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, and I think that brings us into our roles don't have to be identical.
Mhm.
It's just that we are wanting, more of the emotional part from a man than I think traditionally in, centuries in the past
Mhm.
that they have been used to providing. But yeah, we're not saying that like we have to be like carbon copies of each other
Right.
and have the exact same roles. And I do think it's fine if a woman wants to stay at home. I
Mhm.
always am like, you still need to have an education, some kinds of if you have certifications, you need to keep those up to date.
Up to
And
date.
and that is what my mom did. Like my mom, being a registered nurse, was always in a position where if something bad happened to my dad or their marriage or his job, whatever, that she would have been able to step up and work
Mhm.
full time. And I do
I
think
think
that
that's really
that is
important.
absolutely essential. We
Mhm.
never know what curveball life is going to throw at us.
Yeah.
And it's not just for us, it's also for our children.
Yeah.
Because and this is kind of going off on a tangent, but as far as divorce, when people talk about, oh, the horrible effects of divorce and it messes up kids and it's just devastating, it's not the divorce, it's the poverty after divorce, and
Correct.
this is backed up in, like, all kinds of studies where, I'll even see comments of the angry men on my, social
Yeah.
media who they talk about I don't know if it's one study, if there's multiple studies, about outcomes of kids after divorce, and there's one or maybe more that shows that kids do better when the dad has custody. But
Hmm.
that's because they have the money. It is not about
Mm.
dads are better parents. It's about it is way more common for a woman to have, a deadbeat ex-husband who's not paying child support,
Oh,
and the women are living in poverty.
right.
So,
So
that
then
is
that makes sense.
exactly, because when you have the single mom who, is working 2 jobs, making minimum wage and is
Right.
never home, the kids aren't especially if they have a dad who's absent, and the
Mhm.
kids aren't gonna do well in school. They're gonna be doing drugs. They're, gonna be out on the
Yeah.
streets getting into trouble.
Yeah.
So, it really is an issue where women need to be educated. Women need to be able to be in the workforce if something happens where that's needed. But, do what makes you happy, right? I mean, very much believe like all of us want different things and, there's not a right or wrong way to have, conduct your relationship. It just needs to
Right.
be by mutual agreement, like you're both on the same page and
Mhm.
you're both fulfilled. And the bottom line is what we're seeing in a lot of marriages is people are not on the same page and
Yeah.
women are not fulfilled. And that's really,
And people are just not talking about it, honestly.
yeah,
And I think they're scared, and this is where, like, I hope that we can offer this as a sounding board for people, but, because we've been through it ourselves, but I think that friends are kinda scared to bring this conversation up amongst each other, because nobody wants to hint at being the one, and then you're looking at the outcast, but, like, it's happening more and more. Just
yeah.
people are kinda suffering in silence.
Something else I've observed in some of my female friends who are married and also career oriented
Mhm.
is sometimes without even being asked, they just step up to take too much on.
Yeah.
And, I'm thinking of, like, one friend in
I do this in
particular,
work in general.
really, like, when I went to visit this friend, like, she had the much more demanding job than the husband, and they
Mm.
had kids, and, he would get home from his shorter workday and put his feet up and be, like, watching TV with a beer, and she would get home and, like, be cooking dinner and, like, picking
Mhm.
up toys and making sure kids got their baths, and it's like and, of course, I don't know what's going on behind closed doors. Maybe
Sure.
had been a bunch of conversations, but I do think that women a lot of us put that expectation on ourselves
We do.
that, okay, I want to have a job, but it's also my responsibility to be the parent and, make sure all these things get done. And
It's like you can still do your career, that's great, but don't forget about what all of these other things you have to do here too.
Yeah, and it's not realistic to put
Mm-mm.
that on us, onto ourselves, and to not expect that our partner be able to step up and do some of those things. And in those situations, I do think that those are some of the people who end up becoming the most upset and resentful, but
Mhm.
they didn't have those conversations, and,
Yeah.
they just kind of wore themselves out. So have those conversations, because it's not fair to men if we're not being vocal about it and being really clear about, "Hey, here's what I need." And you very well may need a therapist to help you have those conversations, because men e my observation is, um, women will say, "I have said something over and over and over," and it's like for
Yeah.
some reason it doesn't sink into the man until it's gotten to the point of it being really bad.
Well, when it's for the woman, when she's done,
Yes.
you know?
Yeah, and usually by that time, she's, like, asked repeatedly.
Yeah. She's over
So,
it.
I do think that early on, you have to get a therapist involved,
Mhm.
if you're not getting through to your spouse, then try to use a therapist to get through to your spouse. And then ultimately, I mean, some men are not going to change. Some men are not going to be
Mm-mm.
willing to, provide these other things that women are wanting. So I guess that brings us into, okay, here's the situation that we are seeing in society. We're seeing that the traditional marriage is not working for women.
Right.
70% of divorces are initiated by women, and then of the people who aren't divorcing, I still think there's a lot of unhappy women who just aren't divorcing out of fear or, religious reasons, whatever. So, what do we do with this? Like,
Yeah.
you know, what as women, what do we do to change that unhappiness? Maybe we can't change men, but how do we make ourselves happy?
Yeah,
Um
and I also wanna make sure we're clear and fair in that this is not just, like, women aren't happy and this is a one-sided thing because I do see a lot of even some of my female friends who just aren't real with themselves as far as their expectation goes. They feel as though they need to have and women who are in the dating realm, they expect a man to provide everything and their own happiness as well, and I'm not
Yeah.
on board for that. Like, I
Yeah,
think it's each person's they have to own their own happiness,
for
and I
sure.
think that, the reason why a lot of the divorces are happening and why we're saying here that, why it's not working for women, it's probably because we grew up and we didn't know who we were as individuals and what we really wanted, and then by the time we found out, it's too hard almost to, like, go back and you have to reset and reestablish this relationship from the beginning. So I think that, like, as a job for myself being a mother to a daughter, it's my responsibility to just start teaching her, and I've tried to start teaching her what
Mhm.
she can expect, and I know that there's this big, you know, there's this book that I've heard that's always great, but I've not read it myself, but Strong, Fathers, Strong Daughters, but I heard that that's a really good one,
My
to
husband's
start.
read that.
Really?
I think
Yeah.
so. Is it one that is not necessarily geared towards women reading, but it's
It's for men, yeah,
okay, it's for
mhm.
men,
It's
okay.
more just about, like, how you have to start teaching your daughter how to be treated and what's acceptable so that they can choose and have those high standards overall. So I think, like, how can I apply that to my daughter even though
Yeah,
I'm not a male myself, but getting into her and it honestly, it starts at home. She's gonna model the relationships
yep,
that she sees me in. So if she sees me settling, which is part of why, like, I wanted to make sure I was displaying a loving, healthy relationship. So I think a lot of the core of it starts there that we make the change and, how can we model those things and don't just settle to be in a relationship to be with somebody, right? Because
yeah,
you are not just doing the harm to your own self, but to your kids who are gonna see and they're gonna carry that on, you
yeah.
know?
Yeah, that brings up, like, 2 really important things to me is, one, as a mom raising a boy,
Mm,
to really teach our boys emotional intelligence and talk
yes.
about your feelings. Don't
Mhm.
bottle them up.
And it's okay.
It is okay to cry, to be in touch with your emotions. That's actually a
Mhm.
very good thing. And then, when you say don't settle, I don't know that marriage necessarily works for most of us. And I
Yeah,
think that we need to embrace we might not need marriage. Not
right.
everybody, right? It's okay to not marry. It's okay to never marry. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Maybe just
Mhm.
society's evolving and some people will still choose to marry, but I think it needs to be accepted that, other people are going to choose not to, and it's not like you're the crazy cat lady
Right.
and you're looked at as weird for not doing that.
Mhm. I totally agree. I think, like, I have some close friends who, they had both they're in a relationship and, they've both been divorced several times, and they just decided, "We're gonna do life together, but we're just not gonna put a contract between us."
Yeah, yeah, it
And it works
makes
great.
complete sense. Yeah, there's so
Mhm.
many other, options like the living apart together, like, we don't necessarily even need to live in
Blend the
the same
households.
home, let's, have a long-term relationship, but we don't have to make it, look like a marriage. I also
Right.
think that not seeing divorce as a failure
Yeah.
and just not feeling so much stigma around divorce and being able to be honest with ourselves and, "Hey, we went into this with us having different expectations or different needs, or we've
Mhm.
grown apart, we've changed, we have different values," whatever. Being able to accept that and not see this as, "Oh, we failed." You know,
Right.
I think that you can have had a successful relationship for several years, and it was a beautiful thing, and, respect what it was, but then say, "But now it's time to move on," and it not be seen as this horrible, devastating thing.
Right, and I think, you know what, I was gonna ask you too, like, what kind of advice do you offer to the patients, not patients, but your clients that are going through the divorce to share with their children? Because I think that's something really big. Like, I remember I was kinda like avoiding even talking about it with my daughter because 'cause I'm like, "I don't even know how to approach that," you know?
Yeah. Yeah, most therapists say that when you talk to your kids about the divorce, to not get into the specifics of why, to
Mhm.
just be general, like, mommy and daddy are just not happy living in the same home, and we will be happy living in separate homes, and
Mhm.
that doesn't our family's not gonna change, we're still a family, you're still gonna see us both a lot, we're still, mom and dad, we're still gonna make decisions together, etcetera.
Yeah.
But then, certainly in raising them, having those conversations when they're older about, "Hey, here's what I recommend you look for in a relationship, and here's what I've found from my experience matters, and,
Mhm.
how to have the most successful relationships."
Definitely.
All right, so we talked about a lot of really great things today, and I think the takeaway is at the end of the day, marriage isn't broken because women are expecting too much. It's
Right.
that for too long, we were expected to settle for too little. And women are
Mhm.
evolving emotionally, financially, socially, and the traditional model of marriage just hasn't kept up. So I'm hoping that today's conversation has helped our listeners feel validated and maybe even inspired to reflect on what you truly want from a partnership.
Yeah, I think those are really awesome points, and we do have a couple of recommended reads that we'll drop in the show notes too, but a couple of them are Too Good to Leave, Too Bad to Stay by Mira Kirschenbaum, All the Rage, Mothers, Fathers, and the Myth of Equal Partnership by Darcy Lockman, The Second Shift by Arlie Hochschild, and Fair Play by Eve Rodsky. But also, you guys can follow Jeanette on TikTok. She has a lot of great content. She's at ATL Holistic Family Law on TikTok. She is just follow her, give her a follow. We would love that. And let's close this out with like a little moment of gratitude that we'd like to do. So,
All
you want to
right.
kick us off?
Yeah, I am very thankful that we are at the beach right now, and our kids are with us,
Yeah.
and it's just been a nice family trip, and it's been really nice to be able to just unplug from work for a few days, and, it's a little bit cold here, but
Yeah.
it's still been beautiful, and I'm very thankful that we've been able to do this.
I couldn't agree more. I was saying to my daughter, just making a shift in my career and doing something that's for me has allowed me to, the first time in my life, be actually truly more present with her. I haven't received panic emails or text
Mhm.
messages or everything. So it's like, I think that was like a lot of what we talked about in our past few podcasts about, it's hard doing big changes and things for yourself, but it's so rewarding
Yeah.
and just to experience that on this vacation with you guys. And I'm so happy. Make sure to keep listening and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at A Holistic Dose on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube for more fun. Thanks for hanging out with us. We'll be back next week with more unfiltered friend talk right here on A Holistic Dose.
Have a great week.
Bye.